episode we looked at 2 weeks ago, we looked at the Jews' historical claim to their land, the land of Israel. And we saw that, in fact, it is the land of Israel historically, ancestrally. They've simply come back to their own house, something that was wrongfully taken from them. Yes, it was the judgment of God that actually thrust the Jewish people out of their land. But that did not give the nations the excuse to come and take over the land and then claim it belonged to them instead of to God's people, the Jewish people. So we looked at their case historically, that it is historically the land of the Jews. There's always been a Jewish presence in the Holy Land, albeit at times very small. But wasn't it interesting to note that I think about the turn of the century and coming into the 20th century, there was a Jewish majority in Jerusalem. And they'd always been the majority or the largest community when you size up the Jewish community with the Muslim community, the Christian community in Jerusalem. But they had always been the majority in the community size, but about the year that coming into the 20th century, they were the majority of the population of Jerusalem. And then last week we looked at the international sanction to their claim. You remember that Theodor Herzl really gave political expression to the yearning of the Jewish people toward the end of the 1800s, and that expression was, we want a homeland, a national home in our ancient land. And that's what Zionism is. Zionism is an organization, but it's also an ideal that seeks to place the Jewish people as a nation state in their own land, in Palestine. What was called Palestine. What was called Palestine. In fact, you know, I run a Bible school here on a Sunday night, and my Bible students know that something that really irks me is that when you go and buy Christian Bibles and you have maps of the Holy Land at the back, they refer to the land as Palestine. And during the Bible era, both the Old Testament and New Testament, there was no name of Palestine. The name Palestine was given to that land after the Bible era and the Bible books had been written. And it irks me whenever I see that. They should have just stuck to the land of Israel, because that's what it was. Interesting, isn't it? And that's because, of course, the Palestinians in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, from the time that the British Mandate for Palestine was enacted in 1922, then Palestinians were firstly known as the Jews, the Palestinian Jews. And of course the Arabs were there as Palestinian Arabs. But it was set aside as a Jewish homeland. That's what that was all about, what you read. It was the Palestinian cause, you call them Palestinians, but it was Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Liberation Organization which started to use this term as another weapon against the state of Israel, because they'd tried so many times to use violence, warfare, in order to defeat the Jewish state, and they couldn't do it. So they came up with this other form of challenging the state of Israel, and that is its ideology. And so many, and this is particularly true of politicians just don't know, because they've got 1,000 other things to be concerned about right here at home in New Zealand. And so part of what we do, and people I associate with, is try to bring some form of education to politicians in such a way that you're not giving them big index books of information, because that would switch anybody off straight away. But cunningly and gradually we're actually working on politicians to bring some simple understanding to the whole concept of what Palestine really was, whose it was, and who the Palestinians are as well. I thought it would be interesting as we sort of kick off into tonight's episode, just to bring you some scriptural basis for what the Bible calls Palestine. All right, so maybe we can put on that first PowerPoint there. All right, so look at what does the Bible call Palestine? As I said, Palestine was a name invented way after the Bible had been written. All the letters had been written. The book of Revelation had finished. And we should not even have Palestine in our Bible maps, really. Unless you've got a map in the Bible about the early 1900s and coming into the British mandate over Palestine. But look what the Bible calls the land. So this is talking about Joseph, and Joseph is sharing the story when he's in jail and he's just given the baker and the cupbearer of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, their interpretations of their dreams. Remember, the cupbearer had his position restored in 3 days, but in 3 days the baker lost his head, right? And Joseph, knowing that he has the gift of God, he's interpreted correctly, he says to the cupbearer, when all goes well for you, remember me unjustly here in prison. Don't deserve to be here. He said, I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews. You see, that's the land of the Hebrews. Who are the Hebrews? They are the Hebrew-speaking people. There's only one people who speak Hebrew. That's the people of Israel. Okay? But I've got a bit of Ivrit or Hebrew there at the bottom. You see, that's what it is. Ma'aretz ha'avrim. That's the land of the Hebrews. So that's just one title that the Bible gives the land in contention. It's the land of the Hebrews. Then we have this one in Hosea 9:3. Now this is God judging Israel, but he refers to the land. He says, they will not remain in the Lord's land. Ephraim will return to Egypt, etc., etc. Later on, Hosea goes to talk about the wonderful regathering of Israel back to the Lord's land. This is another name for the land. It's the Lord's land. It's the land of the Hebrews. It's the Lord's land. Another one here in Zechariah 2:12 and 13, a great prophecy of the restoration of Israel. He says, the Lord will inherit Judah. Yehudah, that's the Jewish people. The Lord will inherit Judah as his portion in the Holy Land. It's the Lord's land, therefore it is the Holy Land, and will again choose Jerusalem. Holy Land there in the Hebrew is Adamat HaKadosh. The holy ground, actually. Holy ground, holy land. And look at that warning. I think this is a good warning today for the international community. Be still before the Lord, all mankind, because he has roused himself from his holy dwelling. That's a warning for our nation too. That's why we protest when we have to, because we love our nation and we don't want to see New Zealand going down the sinkhole. But it will if it doesn't get this thing with Israel right. Be still before the Lord. So the Lord's land, the Holy Land, the land of the Hebrews, and this one is from 2 Kings 25, and it's talking about the judgment that came upon the kings of Judah toward the end of that kingdom. It says, and the king of Babylon smote them and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away captive out of his land. Now his land actually there is a reference not to, it is the Lord's land, but it's out of his land, out of Judah's land too. His land, the land of Judah. And from Joel 2:18, let Jehovah be zealous for his land and have pity on his people. No wonder the Bible says, anybody touches you is touching the apple of my eye. And I think it's like that with the land of Israel. Anybody touching that land, it's not just the land of Israel, it's the land of God. It's the Holy Land, the Lord's land, it's his land. So, and let Jehovah be zealous or jealous for his land. And have pity on his people. Of course, the people of Israel, the land of Israel is spoken in that verse. And then in Joel 2, very clear, I will gather, this is another warning for us at the end of time. I will gather all nations, says the Lord, and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divvied up. Another expression of the Hebrew word is distributed. They distributed up my land good warning for what the British did. After the British Mandate, they were so noble in actually bringing out the Balfour Declaration. And their favour to Zion won them favour as an empire, but quickly that favour was withdrawn because they withdrew their favour from Zion. In the Hebrew, let's see if I can get it. Okay? I'm confident I can say this in such a way that you will be impressed. The only one who could probably tell me that I've got it wrong would be Linda Cook sitting over there, but you be quiet. All right? Vinishpadati, imam, I will bring them into judgment. Sham there, al-ami, concerning my people, the Nechalati and my inheritance, Israel, Asher, Pezru, the Goyim, they have scattered them among the nations, Ve'et, Atzai, Chalku. Okay? That's what it's saying. So I hope you understood all that. Actually, I don't know why I put that, well, I put the Hebrew there, but basically the English translation, the NIV, is very accurate, okay? He said, I'll bring them on trial, bring them into judgment for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. And in Ezekiel, look at this, Son of man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel. Not the mountains of Palestine, they're the mountains of Israel. These are expressions for what God calls this land in contention. It's the land of the Hebrews, the Lord's land, the Holy Land, and it's the mountains of Israel. And say, mountains of Israel. Harai Israel is there in Hebrew. Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. The enemy said of you, aha, the ancient heights have become our possession. Therefore prophesy and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Because they ravaged and crushed you from every side. This is the nations. So that you became the possession of the rest of the nations and the object of people's malicious talk and slander. He's prophesying to the mountains of Israel, remember. The mountains of Israel particularly are the mountains in the heartland of Israel, which is what we call the West Bank. Therefore, mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to the mountains and hills, to the ravines and valleys, to the desolate ruins and the deserted towns that have been plundered and ridiculed by the rest of the nations around you. This is what the sovereign Lord says, in my burning zeal, I have spoken against the rest of the nations and against all Edom. For with glee and with malice in their hearts, that's the Edomites, they made my land their own possession so that they might plunder its pasture land. You know, I can understand perhaps if God's not so zealous about New Zealand or Australia, but I can understand why he's zealous for Israel, because he calls it my land. In Ezekiel 40, in visions of God, he took me to the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, Aretz Israel. So one of the popular expressions in Hebrew is Aretz Israel, is the land of Israel, and it's found right here in Ezekiel chapter 40 and verse 2. And yes, in the New Testament we see a reference to the land of Israel. This is talking about Joseph bringing Mary and the child Jesus back into the land of Israel. And the angel said, get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead. And I've already probably shown you this one in the last few weeks. I will plant Israel in their own land. So what do we call this land? Their own land. That's the people of Israel's land. Never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them. You see, God calls it his land. He therefore has the right to give it to whoever he wants to give it. We know the Bible teaches us that he's given it to the people of Israel. And maybe just a few things on Jerusalem, I think. For David had said, what does he say about Jerusalem? That David said, since the Lord, the God of Israel, has granted rest to his people and has come to dwell in Jerusalem forever. That tells me God still has his mark and hand on Jerusalem, right? Must have. That's the revelation King David had. Forever. We read in Nehemiah 11:1, now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem, The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of every 10 of them to live in Jerusalem. This is when they came back after the Babylonian exile. No one wanted to live in Jerusalem. They wanted the pasture lands and the open spaces. And so they had to cast lots, and whoever got the lot, 1 out of 10 had to come and live in Jerusalem because it had been demolished and destroyed. It wasn't like it is today. The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of every 10 of them to live in Jerusalem, the holy city. The holy city. Yerushalayim, Ir HaKadosh. Jerusalem, the holy city. Okay? So there is a holy city in the Bible. It is Jerusalem. In Isaiah 45:13, I will raise up Cyrus in my righteousness. I will make all his ways straight. He will rebuild, God says, my city. So you understand why God is very zealous and jealous for what is his. It's his land. It's his city. He has a claim on the holy mount. That's where he's going to send his son to come and reside, on the holy hill of Zion. So we need to know this as Christians so that we are not just fighting for Israel. We're actually fighting for God's inheritance, the inheritance of our God. That's why we're standing up and why we do things like petitions and protests and stuff. We are speaking on behalf of God the truth of whose land it really belongs to. Okay? And we are the ones who can do that because we know the truth, and many of the others are in darkness. Okay? And I'll tell you what, when we speak up and we make a public protest or whatever, however way we say it, the Israelis and the Jews, they see it. And boy, are they encouraged when Christians stand with them and for them. I can tell you that. I think this would be about the last one. Lord, in keeping with your righteous acts, Daniel is praying, turn away your anger and your wrath from Jerusalem, your city, your holy hill. There it is. All right, some of the expressions to what the Bible calls this land in contention, the land of the Hebrews, the Lord's land. It's called, as the Lord's land, it's called his land. He calls it himself my land. It's called the Holy Land, the land of Israel. God calls it, regarding the Jewish people, the people of Israel, it's their own land. The Bible records it as the land I have given them. Jerusalem, it's called the Holy City. God calls it my city. Another expression, your city, your holy hill. All right? So we are very passionate about what we do here in this regard. You can understand and see why Israel has the motto, we will defend ourselves by ourselves. Because it's seen so much betrayal from the international community. The last one was with our own government in December 2016, stab in the back from our foreign minister, and Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, called it an act of war. But Israel has a power behind it that none of the other nations have, because the Lord is zealous for his land and he's zealous for his people. Now let me wrap this up tonight. I thought it was interesting. Look what the British have done, or look what the British had done. Let's have that PowerPoint, please, Rosalind. Decreasing borders. This is the mandate area. There goes Palestine. That was the Palestine that was there when the British gave their famous mandate, or their famous, Balfour Declaration. And that was the promise to the Jewish people. And it wasn't just a promise, a whim of a promise. This is international foreign affairs. They've had backroom discussions with the highest foreign statesmen of other nations like the United States, France, Italy, Germany, and other places, who have agreed, yes, we'll back such a promise. And that's why the British Empire released such a promise. And then that promise to give them for there to be a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, in the green, was ratified legally in the mandate for Palestine. Except from the time of San Remo, when this was the idea behind the national home for the Jews, after San Remo in 1920, when Britain was given this mandate area to govern so that they could facilitate the achievement of a national home for the Jews in that green area, in 1921, Winston Churchill signed off 77% of that land, as you saw in the DVD, so that to appease the Arab demand for another political state, for independence for the Arabs in the area. They already had those areas in Iraq, in Syria, and Lebanon. But this is what Winston Churchill did. But that still left the other 23%. And this is really the area that's under contention today, because this area in green is what the Israelis have, including what are called the disputed territories. It includes, as you know, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank. You can't see the Golan Heights up the north there, but originally the Golan Heights was in that mandate for Palestine, but the British, like Churchill did without any authority, signed off 77% without any authority. Something else the British did without authority, they gave the French the Golan Heights in their mandate in Syria. So the Jews have really had a rough deal. And by 1947, after World War II, 6 million Jews murdered, then this is what you see in green is what the Jews were being offered in the United Nations Resolution 181, which wanted to turn that 23% into both an Arab and a Jewish state. Okay? And that's what, on the 14th of May, 1948, when the Jews declared their independence, this is what they would have settled for had it not been for Arab aggression to try and destroy them. And in the process of the war and independence, they gained more land. They went from that to that. That's what they call the 1967 borders. And of course, because of further Arab aggression in 1967, Israel's borders increased more rapidly. It went from those lines there. They are actually the enemies of Israel from the Egyptians, the Saudi Arabians, the Jordanians, the Syrians and Lebanese in the north, coming against Israel, converging on their borders, which caused Israel to make a preemptive strike on the 5th of June 1967. And as a result of 6 days of war, Israel took the West Bank, including Jerusalem, the jewel in the crown. They took the Gaza Strip, they took the Golan Heights, and of course all of Sinai, which is rich in oil reserves belonging to the Egyptians. They took it all in 6 days. But in order to appease Jimmy Carter and the Egyptians, they gave back the Sinai. By this time, in 6 years, or in probably 10 years, the Israelis had already established settlements in the Sinai. And I still remember as a teenager watching the agonizing scenes of Israeli soldiers taking their people off the roofs of their houses in the Sinai because they had to dismantle those settlements like they did to Gaza in 2006. Okay? But that's Israel's first ever decreasing borders, but you can see the justice in it. How the Arabs had caused Israel to go to war. The result of that is Israeli victories and the Israelis actually getting the land that had originally been allotted to them anyway. Okay? We can expect, I can tell you that if there is another war, and there will be, that Israel will take more land. That's the story so far with Israel. I should mention that they've come up in the last couple of months with a very controversial law in Israel called the nation-state law. If I can, hopefully I've brought that with me. Called the nation-state law, and it caused a heck of a controversy both in Israel and in the international community. And I looked at that law. It's called the Basic Law, Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. What this means as a basic law, it's harder for future governments to wipe it out. You know, like our government does, brings in a new law, change a government, they cancel it straight away. But the Israelis have established this basic law with such clout and legal authority that it cannot be just wiped out by a subsequent government. And let me just read some of the things in this basic law. The basic principles: the land of Israel is the historical homeland of the Jewish people in which the state of Israel was established. The state of Israel is the national home of the Jewish people in which it fulfills its natural, cultural, religious, and historical right to self-determination. The right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. What a lot of controversy. The Arabs felt left out and all the other stuff you heard from the international community. I'll tell you, God is right behind this law. And the Arabs who get on with Israel do really well. It's only those who don't want the Jews to have what God is giving them who end up becoming a problem. That's just the truth. But that's the nation-state law, a basic law. And Netanyahu's very smart. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's very smart because he knows that in the future, all that he sees with what's happening in the world, he has to secure Israel as a Jewish state. As a Jewish state. All right.